So, look, the fact of the matter is we're all sort of living in a period of turmoil. We know this, and it's a little scary, very scary, but it's also a great opportunity. When you have a crisis and when things sort of melt down, the next stage, the next evolution is to create new things. And that's the opportunity of design and innovation, design thinking. So I just wanted to open a general conversation in terms of, in this period of economic turmoil, where do you think, or how can design or innovation, I'm using them interchangeably, we can talk about that later, but what kind of role can innovation play in getting us through and creating something new as we come out of this period? I'm looking at you because you're directly across and you're at Citibank, so
okay.
Let's start with you.
Okay. Well, working in banking and financial services, I'm arguably at the epicenter of the turmoil happening in the economy today, and having played the role at Citi as Chief Innovation Officer a couple of years ago, and more recently focusing on our global consumer digital strategy, I really see both design and innovation as providing fundamental tools to the financial services industry to help lead through kind of to the next phase of what the industry would look like. So sort of at the most macro strategic level, you think about the need to really rethink product offerings. Rethink how, what is a mortgage product going to look like in the future? There's a lot of, the design principles that I think most people traditionally think about applying in the physical world to develop a product that's tangible, that you can touch and feel, apply equally well to the design of service-based product like a mortgage. So at the strategic level, I think design becomes critical. On the day-to-day level, the immediate need facing our business today, one of the immediate needs is certainly lowering expenses. Right? The industry has to really return to profitability, and so expense management becomes very, very important and doesn't feel sexy. And you wouldn't say, what's the relationship between design and expense management? Well, one of the areas that we're heavily focused on is the digitization of our business, and how can we really understand and design customer experiences that people can go through in a self-service kind of way, so that they can manage their relationships with us, and frankly, in a way that's more effective for them and more efficient for us. Rule of thumb is that a telephone call is $3, a web interaction 30 cents, and a mobile interaction is 3 cents. So you can create a much better customer experience for individuals applying good design principles, and also get the sort of economic result that we need. So I think very, very strong correlation.
One of the people I respect hugely is a guy named Sam Lucente at Hewlett-Packard, and maybe it was a year ago, 2 years ago, someone asked him, Sam, when Mark Hurd, the guy who came in and took over Hewlett-Packard, who's an operations guy, he's not a creativity design guy, they, well, how are you going to save your job, Sam, who's a designer? And he said, well, that was a real problem. First of all, I cut off my ponytail, and he did. So he looked kind of straight and operational. And then he said, pretty much what you said. He said, design is very powerful. It could do any number of things. And for me, with Mark Hurd coming in and they needed to save money, it was a crisis, he said, I went to my boss and I said, design could do 3 things for you right now. It could simplify, meaning we can simplify all the parts of all the products and save you a lot of money. It can differentiate, so our products can begin to differentiate from our competitors. And then, at a certain point, it can innovate when that's appropriate and come out, and that would combine the first 2 and other things like a great consumer experience. So that's pretty much what you were saying.
Yeah.
And it's the power of design. It's really, quite amazing. So let's go this way. Yeah, whatever.
I think one of the big themes that people don't necessarily look at in the area which I'm involved, which is design and communications, marketing, advertising, is that most of what's happening today is because of the impact of technology on the consumer. And I think when you look at that combined with the fact that I don't hear many people talk about how far we're into the information age, but we're somewhere in there. Could be 4%, could be 14%. And I think it's going to get exponentially more interesting. And certainly sitting next to somebody from Google, they spend a lot of time with interacting with information. I think there's also, from a design perspective in the work that we do, the real innovation was done during the 60s in terms of agency models, and there's, we hope, new opportunities based on the impact of technology on what was a model that was based on television and now is involved with so many different platforms, which brings up the number of screens that we interact with and how difficult a challenge that is from a design perspective, because I've seen, I'm part of a group called AGI, which is Alliance Graphique International, and I found many of the people who were great at doing posters never made the transition to the LP cover. And the ones that made the transition to the LP cover never made the transition to the CD. And the CD never made the transition to wild postings, which are more popular for music today. And so there's the laptop, desktop, and the television, and the cell phone, and dynamic signage, or what I sometimes say is Minority Report or Blade Runner on steroids. You'll see them everywhere. And then also the new model for a movie theater experience. And I think the one that's of most interest to me right now, and I think that Amy mentioned the transaction cost is the least, is the mobile phone, because there's a huge number of them throughout the world, and most countries throughout the world interact with the internet mobily, and that small screen is an interesting challenge to design for. And so sometimes I say that the third screen will become the first screen, and it's not just the right message at the right time, but it's also at the right place. So it's the whole integration of GPS.
Yeah. Which leads us to Android, or whatever you want.
I can talk a little bit about Android, but I thought at first on the economic issue, a couple of observations. I think that we've been saying a lot of different things around Google lately as we've been thinking about how do we approach this. And I think there's been a few key philosophies that are important. Scarcity breeds clarity. Constraint breeds creativity. And at Google, innovation and also frugality is part of our lifeblood. When I look back at some of the non-obvious design challenges we've taken on and how that's impacted our products, it's really interesting to think about how frugality and scarcity really fed it. When I showed up at Google, I did my interviews and I walked through the office, and they showed me around, and there was this there were 4 quadrants of the office, and the first quadrant was where all the people sat. And in the second quadrant, there was this peculiar setup where there were these, the cubes had little blue taped squares on them, and all these computer parts laying around. And I said, well, what is this? And they said, well, to run Google, we need to have something called a data center, which is a place that has redundant power, redundant bandwidth. It's a place where our computers live, and it actually answers all the searches. But in the high-rent Bay Area, this is the highest rent of all. So what we've done is we figured is right now we have these refrigerator-style machines, and they have 20 shelves on them, and we get a computer, we rip the top off, and we put the computer one on each shelf. So we can fit 20 in a case. And they said, no, but as a startup, we don't have a lot of money. When we look at the rent, in order to really be profitable, we can't put just 20 computers in a column. We need to fit 80 in a column, which means we can't put just one computer on each shelf. We need to put 4 computers on each shelf. So what do we have here? We have blue squares that are the size of the shelf. Next to each one, there's the parts for 4 computers. When we get tired of coding, we come around the corner and we play with it like a puzzle to see if we can fit all 4 computers in the box. And that's actually how we did our first to-scale machine design at Google. Of course, it had the same problem. And probably the designers in the audience can understand this, because we were just doing blue taped down squares, we weren't actually modeling the 3rd dimension, which was height, so they kind of operated like your sock drawer. So when you pulled one out, the one above it came out and it sort of cascaded. But when I think about just that portion, like the fact that we didn't have a lot of money, the fact that we knew that we needed to make 80 fit where 20 had fit previously, made us think creatively. And now when we look at new problems like, how do we scan all the world's books and get all that information online? Can we do that for $10 a book? Can we do that for $1 a book? How do we really take cheap, readily available technology like high-resolution cameras and use that in our scanning efforts? So rather than having a really special machine that's designed just for those books, what if you just use a high-res camera, photograph it, and transport, gather the data that way? When we look at Street View, how do you get a picture of the front of every address in the world? Right? You've got to design a car that has a camera, that has a system for collection. You have to account for things like cloud cover, dark days, light time, different seasons, all of these different elements. And I think what you see is that a lot of those constraints build some of the most interesting innovations.
I really agree with your point that constraint breeds creativity. And I'm thinking, one of the challenges that we're facing now in banking is clearly people, you have people out there who, for whatever reason, job loss or rate resets on their loans, are figuring out, like, how do I pay my bills? And so, the historical model for, lending money to people is, well, you lend your money, you have to pay your bill. If you don't pay your bill, we'll try to work with you, but then you go to collections and, blah, blah, blah. And what I'm seeing now happening, and I was just in a meeting this week with some of my colleagues, where there is an immense amount of creativity being applied to really, how can we help people stay in their homes? How can we help people stay current on their bills? Because there is a very real struggle that a lot of people in this country are facing, and they're our customers, and we really want to help them. And so I think what's happening is a real turn from historically, I think a lot of people felt, it's kind of like the bank and me, and I'm on the opposite side of the table. I think people are coming together and saying, what most people really do want to, most people really want to pay their bills. It's just stuff happens. And how do we really work with people? And it's leading to an immense amount of creativity already in the way products are structured and in the way we partner with people to keep them current and help them stay on top of their finances. And it's so that constraint is important. I'm also thinking about when I first became Chief Innovation Officer at Citi back in 2005, I think there was an assumption, my colleagues thought, I was getting like this massive budget. And I was like, look, I don't want a big budget. That I would rather start with very, very tiny amounts of money and push people to really use their creativity to develop new models and to work more in a pilot mode than to spend millions and millions of dollars going to market. And I think that kind of constraint around dollars really did create a different mindset, culture, mentality, and focus. So I think it's actually it can be very healthy, and it can really be a positive.
It's fascinating. So these troubling times can actually lead to, can lead to bursts of new creativity in whole new directions. I like that. It's very interesting. Bob, do you have any sense of your firm has done just great stuff in terms of interaction design, and how people. Well, I was just thinking about Nike Plus and some of the other things, and about creating a platform where people within a certain space or interest can gather and basically build their own interactions, their own stuff like that. Do you have any thoughts about, in this period, what would be most fruitful, whether in banking or anything?
Well, I think that the user experience is probably the number one thing on our mind as we work on the design front. And how would you create for all of our clients, which we're working across 22 of them, create an application that ties into community. So the one that I presented this past weekend for the ANA in Orlando was based around the human race, which couldn't have been built unless if we had developed Nike Plus. And Nike Plus is a integration between a chip in your shoe and a iPod, and soon to be iPhones as well, and other products. But the human race happened on 8/31 this summer, and it was in 26 cities and over 800,000 people running simultaneously, whether you were running with the Nike Plus apparatus on your own, or whether you were running in one of the host cities. It's tied into a lot of events and so forth. And those are the kinds of projects that we're thinking about now. I recently presented also with the head of e-commerce for Nokia, a device, an application for their devices, which takes video, bookmarks, photography, music, etc., and they all look like part of a leaf, and they're color-coded to a mapping program, so that it's essentially a digital travelogue. And that would be an application that ties into community, could be shared on Facebook or MySpace or just generally. So for all of our clients, we're looking for applications, and that leads to the need to have technologists as part of one's offering today. It's critical. We have over 120 people that write applications now, and it's really critical for whether it's a small application or a very large one, how you would create an application that ties to community.
Speaking of community, I was, now that I'm a bit of a vagabond and I'm not tied to the McGraw-Hill mail system, I got a Gmail account. So it's Bruce.Nussbaum1 at gmail.com. I don't know who Bruce Nussbaum without the one is. Can you do something about that, Bud? Very strange.
Namespace design is actually really hard.
And I need a calendar. So I went to the, and I just, I'm just poking around, and so I poked on the Google Calendar to see if it would work for me or whatever, and it looked okay. And maybe I'll go into it. But within an hour after just poking around Google Calendar, I got an email from someone at the New School who was recommending Google Calendar because people are on Google Calendar at the New School, which I found slightly intrusive, but actually quite fascinating in terms of community. I knew you were going to be here today, so. And it turns out, it makes an awful lot of sense. And so there was this reaching out of someone, prompted by whatever, to join a community. And it's exactly what I need, because I'm deinstitutionalized for the first time in several decades, and I'm sort of out there, and I need a new community. And it was interesting that this community was reaching out to tell me to join them. And I just wanted to talk about community a little bit in terms of, if there's anything that we need now in times of trouble, it's community and communication with people of like troubles or like opportunities or what have you. How does Google see this in terms of
Well, we definitely think that the internet breeds, the internet likes openness, and it breeds connectedness. So when you look at, I think there's a couple of main initiatives at Google that do really matter in terms of overall community. One is what you referred to, which is how do we move information into the cloud? And of course the cloud is a buzzword, but the concept itself is very powerful. The idea that we are running these data centers. They are a cheaper, more reliable way to store data. The data that you put in the cloud is going to be stored in duplicate or triplicate. It's going to be replicated. It'll be available from everywhere. And it's a lot safer to put,
cloud.
Cloud.
Just a little bit more cloud. I look at the cloud. I understand that.
So what the cloud is the cloud is the idea that your files could live on your computer, or they could live in a data center computer somewhere else where you could log into them from any computer just using your username and password. So how can you access that data? And is that a better way to store data or not? But because we're running these data centers, and because we go for reliability, redundancy, it means that that data is being stored in duplicate, triplicate, and it means that if you dropped your computer, you might lose everything on it, right? You could damage a file, you could misplace a file, where that won't actually happen to your data in the cloud. It's actually a lot more robust. So Gmail, Google Docs and spreadsheets, Calendar, really leverage the cloud. Put your dates in the cloud and calendar. Do this with email. Your email's all there, your attachments. You can get there from any computer. Similarly with Docs and spreadsheets. And I can assure you the calendar was purely a coincidence. We're not actually looking at who pokes around where. That said, Calendar is one of our hottest apps, and it's growing really, really fast. I think the key insight in Calendar was sharing. Yes, people want a calendar, but the most important thing about a calendar is that you can share it with other people, and they can see when you're busy or when you're free, or if you're very close to them, you might actually show them even what you're doing and when. And being able to see that actually aids scheduling, because instead of 4 emails back and forth, hey, can you meet Thursday? Yeah, I can. What time? Okay, I'll put it on my calendar. You put it on yours. If you can just say, hey, I looked at your calendar. Seems like you're free then. I propose this time. Can you accept it? Can you decline it? It actually eases and makes that transaction a lot more efficient.
Do you have a, now that I have you here, is there a front stage, backstage part of your calendar that is there a part of the calendar that you can in fact make part of the community and part of it that you keep private?
That's right. So you can actually decide whether or not your calendar is public or private, and on individual events you can decide the level of privacy that you want. So for example, you can say, I just want to be shown as busy during this time, right? Maybe I have a doctor's appointment or something that I don't want, you know, a lot of viewed much more publicly. Or you can actually have it be open and viewable. So it's interesting, you know, for example, outside of Google, you can see that I have a 90-minute meeting here and a 30-minute meeting there, but they're just blocked as busy times. Then outside of Google, you know, on other events, you can actually see what I'm doing. And inside the company, you know, it's much more open, and people can set their settings the way they feel comfortable.
Mm-hmm. So you could set it in terms of levels of intimacy and levels of connection and publicness and all the rest of it.
Mm-hmm. So this is one of the ideas of community that we're building on, but it really leverages the concept of the cloud and the concept of sharing. The same thing with Docs and spreadsheets. We really think that when you look at how people work, you know, content creation is in and of itself a social act. Why would you create a spreadsheet? Why would you create a document? You create those things because you want to share ideas with someone else. And we also think that by having that stored in one central place on a server, it ultimately removes a lot of workflow problems, version control. It's easy. You don't need to worry about, did someone just read the last version of something and not and miss the fact that there's been an update since, because it's there. You can back up the version control. You can look at the most recent, but it's a lot easier. And so I think that really does build the notion of a working community and how can it work better. And I think the other interesting concept, there's a couple of interesting concepts of community I could talk about. For example, we have Orchid, our social network, which is really about how do you connect people. We have iGoogle, where we have a developer community that's building gadgets and applications for people to use on the homepage. But I actually think one of the most interesting stories of community is actually happening in our geo products at the moment. Because a lot of people think about user-generated content, and they think about Flickr and YouTube and fun pictures and fun videos, and that's good, but it's a little bit more frivolous. And there is something really meaningful that we're seeing happening on geo, which is we basically think of Google Earth, Google Maps, Google Street View as trying to build a world mirror. How do you build a mirror onto the world and actually try and build the most accurate replica of the world that's ever been built before? And the way you do that is by using community. So we have things like Google My Maps, where you can actually just come and edit the map and say, you know, you thought this address was here, it's there. It turns out in Buenos Aires, they didn't have a great subway map. The best map of the subways and where the stops are was built on Google Maps, and you can actually see it there. We have people building their college campuses in 3D scale models using SketchUp. And I think that there's really powerful things that are happening in terms of being able to visualize the world. I was really touched last year. We collaborated with the National Holocaust Museum to put out a layer on Darfur, so people could actually go into Google Earth and they could see Darfur from above, and you could actually see that the villages had been burned, and you could see, you know, what was happening in a way that was much more visceral than other elements. And I think the ability to visualize, to be able to understand better what's going on is really what brings people together. And the collaborative efforts in terms of how many edits we're getting per hour, the types of maps we're getting generated, I think is just really inspiring in terms of the type of connectedness and community the internet can build.
I think the visualization of data and just the visualization of our environment is one of the, I mean, to me, it's one of the more revolutionary things in our lives. Data visualization, I don't know, Gapminder, the movement of the showing of data in a very dynamic way is hugely powerful. You know, I grew up in, lots of folks grew up in bar charts. You know, if you wanted to show changes in data or whatever, you would have a bar chart or a graph. And that seems so incredibly static now, given all the things that we could do. In terms of data and in terms of the world we live in. And it's almost a very generational kind of thing. And I have nothing else to say about that except it's really, I'm astounded by it. It's hugely powerful. I think people are beginning to think and see the world in a visual way, very much unlike their parents and grandparents. And it's powerful. Yeah.
I just want to go back a minute to the comment on community, because I'm thinking about how does that relate to banks. So you can imagine lots of people running around Citi and saying, you know, what social networking? What do we do about, you know, what do we do about social networking? Because that seems like really important. And you know, when I talk to people internally, I say, like, look. Facebook did not invent social networking. People have cared about community and cared about what their peers thought and wanted to know what other people were doing, you know, since the beginning of there being communities. And I see a couple of places where it's really relevant in the banking industry and at Citi, and I think the issue of data visualization does become important, one of them. First of all, getting back to the topic of innovation, the ability to engage in community and dialogue with people can be a huge source and create sort of co-creation models. To design products and design customer experience becomes very important, and clearly that's happening, you know, on many, many dimensions at Google, and I think it's a very ripe opportunity to introduce that sort of co-creation into sort of what you view as a more traditional industry, banking. Secondly, I see, and I was telling the story before we sat down to chat, I think we have to acknowledge that our customers are going to their communities to address servicing questions. So I always tell this story about my teenage son, who a couple of years ago was going out to the West Coast to snowboard, and he wanted to get, I said to him, you better figure out how to get the snowboard on the plane. Now, I would have called customer service at the airline and said, you know what, because I said, I do not want to get to the airport and have a big hullabaloo about how the snowboard is getting on the plane, and I am not spending $100 to ship that snowboard. And so, so I just would have picked up the phone and called customer service. So I'm bugging, going like, well, did you figure it out? He goes, yeah. I go, what'd you do? He went to the community. He went to a chat room of other snowboarders. He's got his community somewhere. So like, how do you deal with the airline to get the snowboard on the plane? And he had it all figured out. So I said, there's tremendous implications for large companies and really an opportunity to really rethink what's the customer service model and how do we sort of partner with those communities to help manage the servicing experience, because people are doing that anyway. And getting back to the conversation about expenses and just delivery of a stronger experience, I think that's just an issue, an opportunity that traditional companies need to acknowledge and figure out how to tap into. Back to your point about data and visualization, I see the other opportunity I see around community and banking is this whole notion of peer comparison. So people like to know how other people are doing, and especially today with people having a huge need to get their arms around better strategies for managing their money, a very good source of ideas is, well, what are other people like me doing? And so I think there's a just tremendous opportunity for companies like Citi to tap into their data in a way that's very productive and helpful to individuals to make more transparent in a non-personally identifiable way, of course, how people like them are managing their financial lives. And so I think there's a very open frontier to bring community into banking on a lot of dimensions.
You could do personas, you could do various families doing this or that.
Yeah, it's just very basic things. You know, somebody's on a website and they're, you know, doing bill payment, and instead of just having it be all about, well, let me pay the utility bills and the mortgage and the gardener and this and that, could you integrate into that experience, well, people like you are managing their budgets like this, or here's another strategy, and you can really get to those kinds of recommendations by, you know, through the data that you're collecting anyway.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's very, very powerful and very, very pro-consumer.
Data visualization is something that I'm personally very interested in, because the direction that marketing and advertising design is going into requires that you understand analytics and data. And, you know, and I was talking earlier about Nike Plus as an example. What we found is a lot of people don't like to run with music. Some people are purists and like to just run without it. But what we did find is that everybody loves personal data. So all the information that we provide on Nike Plus about your runs and your challenges and your personal information is hugely important to individuals. Also, when I went to Seattle and went into the new Rem Koolhaus library, they have data visualization of what's being taken out of the library. So you have the integration of data with physical space. And it's just designed in a very nice way. And I think it adds to the experience of being in the library. More importantly, I think from a creative perspective, it's critical that we create data visualization in a way that creative people would be able to grasp what the information is about, and it could seriously change their insights in what they're doing, but they wouldn't want to go through spreadsheets. So it's got to be presented in a visual way. And going back historically to Muriel Cooper, who was a personal friend who ran the Visual Language Lab at MIT Media Lab, she was doing very innovative work in 3D a long time ago. And we actually haven't seen the 3D interface make its way into anything other than airport control and things like that. So I think it's going to be a very interesting combination of data and pre-visualization and 3D, where you don't get lost on interfaces as it relates to the future of the web and mobile, et cetera.
I'm waiting for, you know, the potential in healthcare or education. I mean, just we're talking about the big things. Love to see Google involved in some of these things. It's really the next step. We may be able to do that coming out of this period of turmoil, perhaps with the political change. Maybe we could talk a little bit about that, because I think the discussion about data visualization and community, I think, are just hugely powerful and present kind of different models and great potential for dealing with some of the big civic social issues of our time. How would we do that? I mean, if we had to put together, this is a very smart group, and I think at some point we ought to open it up to the audience and just have a conversation, if that's okay. Is that okay, Paul? Okay.
No.
You know, how would we apply these things to making some of these systems better as we come out of this crisis? If we had to create a national innovation policy, or something like that, I'm just making it up, what would be the elements that we would sort of put together that would deal with, let's say, healthcare or energy, small problems like that, or education? What are the kinds of things that you'd like to see put into a program and put someone in the cabinet who might be involved in implementing that?
I have one really quick thing to say, because I'll forget it, is I was just watching Meet the Press, and Thomas Friedman was on, and he was talking about his new book, that it's not just flat, it's hot and crowded and as well. And he brought up something around what could be a really great thing for the United States, and hopefully the innovation will come from us, is called ET, and that's energy technology. And then at the same time, not that long before, I had been to the Museum of Modern Art, and they have a show that I think is still up, but they removed the actual prefab buildings, called Home Delivery. And I noticed that the people that were walking through these homes were not necessarily New Yorkers. You could tell by their conversations and stuff. And the enthusiasm around prefabrication, the enthusiasm around green technology, geothermal, wind, and the relationship to energy, and that if I were younger and I was starting again, I might not move into digital communications, I might move into energy technology. And it started me to thinking about really what we're doing is marketing technology, or the impact of technology on marketing and advertising, et cetera. So I think that that's a really big area, tremendous interest. When you walk through one of these prefab houses and you realize that maybe in the future I could buy a little plot of land somewhere, and then rather than putting down a trailer, that's the little Bambino airflow is a good choice. You could build this little prefab house, and it would be, everybody seems to be really interested in physical space and the green technologies.
It's true. I think they're still up where they were a couple of days ago. And these are older versions of it. You can envision, modern day prefabs that are alive in terms of technology and all the rest of it. So you were going to...
Well, I was going to drill in on health, because we launched Google Health in May, and I spent a lot of time over the past year thinking about health, how we can make it better. And I think there's two themes to touch on. One is personal health records, and the other is some of the new genetic tests. What was interesting for me is I started looking at the design of our health site with our health team last year and trying to understand, how should people visualize their health information. We're really in sort of an unthinkable state at the current moment, because almost everything is online. You can buy your airline tickets online, you can do your banking online, you can see all of your records and all of the things that are really pertinent to you. But how many people here have seen their doctor's chart? Like almost no one. Who here has the ability to get a copy of it if they needed it this afternoon? Almost no one, right? When you think about that, there's a huge one. There's just a huge brute force task of how do you get that information into the hands of consumers? How do you organize it? How do you design an interface that makes it understandable? But by just, we're really living kind of in the dark ages when it comes to how those health records are handled and how empowered you are as an individual to it, right? It's like that Seinfeld episode where Elaine sees her chart and is mystified by it, right? And in fact, we're still living in that state like 15 years later. And so, I really think it's very important that we start really empowering consumers, and people should, to your right, in the 21st century, as a citizen of the internet, to actually be able to see your health record online, to be able to say, I want to take my health record to a different doctor and get a second opinion, or I just want to see what was that prescription that I took 4 years ago without having to call the doctor's office to get it. Am I due for a tetanus shot? These types of simple things. When you think about how much easier we could make this, and then when you think about the savings that it could provide, we've been partnering with the Cleveland Clinic. They're one of the best places in the country to go and have heart surgery done. So people fly into Cleveland and get heart surgery, and the first thing that happens is people they've been diagnosed, say, in like San Francisco, and being told, you've had a chronic heart condition, time has come for surgery. They fly to Cleveland, and they repeat all the tests that were just done in San Francisco that caused that doctor to conclude it there immediately upon arrival in Cleveland. Same exact tests, a $2,300 battery of tests immediately on arrival. Why don't we just have a way of transmitting that data electronically there? I think it's a really powerful idea, and we've started to see, even just in terms of daily living, Cleveland has a large population of elderly people who live in Arizona or Florida in the winter and in Ohio in the summertime, and they move back and forth. And just being able to say, I have my health record, I can log in here, and when I get health care in Arizona, my doctor makes additions to my chart, and when I go to Ohio, my doctor immediately sees it, and they're sharing between those doctors. Because right now they literally take manila folders full of papers out of their suitcases and say, this is what happened to me over the winter, this is what happened to me over the summer. And there's got to be a better way to handle that. And I think when we look at our cost of storage, it's very low. Being able to store that information online, things like x-rays, your prescriptions, your doctors, your doctor's comments and doctor's visits, as well as your labs. Those are things that we should be able to get online and people should have better access to. And then there comes the question of, that's one way to make healthcare cheaper. And I think by having all that information there and having more complete information, we'd like to believe that that will ultimately make people healthier. Doctors will have better information, they'll be able to give you better treatment. But I also think that there's a whole, generation of biotech companies that are really coming into play now that are striving to make people healthier. And when you look at some of the personal genetics that are coming online, 23andMe, Navigenics, where it's a several $100 test, but you get to understand, do you have a proclivity for breast cancer? Do you have a proclivity for Parkinson's disease? So if you start to see those symptoms in yourself, you can get ahead of it early. And I think that that could be hugely important and interesting in terms of how does technology and innovation really advance how healthy we can be. And I definitely think there's a public policy part of it, but a lot of that comes from how do the records get handled, how easy do we make this institutional change that needs to happen to really empower the citizens with their records.
Privacy issue.
I think there's certainly some analogies between healthcare and banking, and really at the bottom of it, or at the top of it, people want access to their information. So in banking, it's my money, it's my data, I should be able to access it, I want my records to be portable. And I think the opportunities that Citi is taking advantage of are clearly, in the context of our customer relationships, giving people portability and access to their information by leveraging technology to deliver banking products and services, not just traditionally in the traditional branch environment in the call center, but clearly on the web, in mobile phones, digital displays, and physical environments, taking our banking products and services into transit systems, which have a significant effort going on around the world to really get closer to customers, thinking about them as commuters, because so many people have a commute. So taking our products and services to transit systems and doing things like that. I think that where the government plays a role is clearly we operate, as the healthcare industry does as well, in the context of a regulatory environment designed to really protect customer data, protect people's rights to privacy around their information, and frankly also in a technological environment where the needs to continually advance information security are very, very important, because we have a trust relationship with our customers. We have a trust brand that's fundamental to people wanting to do business with us, and so continually advancing the information security infrastructure and really understanding, complying with the regulatory environment and honoring it is important. I think the public policy issue may come from, are those regulations keeping pace with people's desires and the opportunities to access their information and move records around in a way that probably was not possible when these regulations came into being. And so I think that's the public policy issue, is to really keep pace, make sure that the spirit and intent of those policies is really in sync with the capabilities that are out there and with people's sort of ever-advancing needs to access their information.
This is brilliant. I never really made the connection between banking and health. Most people don't. But the issues are really very, very similar. The models can be very similar, the technology very similar, and the public policy very similar. Wow, I hadn't really thought about that. The other thing that sort of comes to mind is this discussion about community. Once you're able to have that information and you have an understanding, you can, in fact, begin to share it with communities and get information peer-to-peer. And again, it's sort of a different model than the one we have now. But it's also very, very powerful. The more information you have, the more you can begin to get other information from people who are in like circumstances. My mother-in-law, my mother, got to a doctor, and basically they just put themselves in the hands of the doctor, you know, and it's usually a male doctor. And that's the way they get medical care. They kind of do some research about who's a good doctor, which is what we all do, and then they just, I'm in the hands of a good doctor and I'll do whatever he says. And that's a completely different model from the way most of us act today, in which we take much more responsibility for getting information, for choosing, and all the rest of it. It's a huge change that's going to continue, for sure. Okay, anything else? Should we open this up for discussion? What time is it? It's 9:30. How much time do we have? To 10? A little after?
10.
Whatever? 10? Okay. In the name of engagement and community and conversation, let's talk a little bit this way instead of just this way. Yeah?
I have a question. Does it,
Why don't you identify yourself a little bit? And
yes, I have a question about, this is,
Yeah, just for the web.
are you planning to implement a vehicle where clients who don't want to be discriminated against or punished for not allowing their identity to be in the clouds or in the systems that you're discussing, clients who insist on their privacy, where are you going? Are you creating something where they can walk in and they can have personal service, where they don't do it via a technical object such as an iPod?
Yeah, I think that certainly at Citi, the model for interacting with our customers that I see going forward into the future is one that's multi-channel. I mean, we were talking before the meeting, Bob and I, about how there is no substitute in some cases for the personal relationship and face-to-face interaction. And I think clearly the way we operate our business is we have a very strong physical distribution network that's global. So there are branches, there are call centers, there are relationship managers, and you can certainly, if you want to, interact with people. And I think that's really, really important. I think that's going to persist, certainly in the banking industry and certainly at Citi. I think as you see the demographics shifting and the world just becoming more global and more complex, the opportunities and the customer desire to really be able to interact digitally is only going to continue to strengthen. So I think the trick for Citi, and certainly the path that we're going down, is to say, how do we really have a model for distribution interaction that's multi-channel? Right, so that's branch, ATM, call center, web, mobile, and any other screens that come into being. Because I think there's sort of like there's other things that are going to happen. But then how do you make that experience make sense across the channels? I think you were talking before about this just immense fragmentation just in screens. And how do you really manage your brand and manage your customer experience so that when customers come in contact with you, wherever they come in contact with you, based on their choice, right? They sort of know who you are as an organization and institution. They know what you're about, and they feel that you have an appropriate knowledge of who they are. So I should never have to re-enter my information, right? If you have my name and address in the branch, when I go online to apply for a product, and once I identify myself, there should be pre-fill. So it comes down to very, very simple design applications to really create that seamless connectivity of experience, so the customer is comfortable and they get the benefit of interacting with you in any channel that's appropriate for them.
I have one just point that I thought was interesting. I recently closed a loan, which we were talking about earlier, with Citi, and the banker that I used didn't bring his computer. I thought that was interesting. He did everything on his palm, Palm phone. And I thought that those are fairly complicated transactions to have everything available mobily. And then even if he left the room, I contacted him. So, and then I think we talked a little bit about on the personal interaction space where video conferencing is going, because it's available on Nokia's N95, which I use, and then it is getting very inexpensive, and it's going all the way from these tiny screens to much bigger ones, which I saw at DreamWorks, where they use the Halo system, and it's telepresence. You actually could have the same kind of conversation you could have with being 3,000 miles away, with high definition and great lighting and voice and motion detection, et cetera. But I think that's a very interesting question, because I'm not sure that there is an answer for where things are going and how people would get a different experience than going into a cloud and dealing with information in a more traditional way. I'm sure you have a point of view on that.
Well, we think about this a lot. Privacy is really important at Google because it's the core of what we do. At our essence, we're a search engine, and that search engine is built on trust. You know you're getting the best answer from Google, not because someone paid the most, not because, and you want to know what do they know about me in order to provide that answer, right? You need to be able to have trust when you're learning about a new concept or you're curious about a concept. That's a vulnerable thing to be expressing, and so trust is paramount, and then privacy is really a big part of it, and how do we preserve it? And that said, there's a lot of suspicion online. What do people know about me? Who knows what when, right? So Bruce illustrated that earlier. Did that email come from a colleague because I looked at calendar earlier, right? One of my favorite stories was our first year. We had just finished internationalizing the site, and no one knew we had the messages. So for our April Fool's joke, we ran the site in Portuguese, and we had for a day just so people logged on like Google was just in Portuguese. We thought it was a great April Fool's joke, and then we got an email from someone said, "Is this because I searched for Portuguese sausages the other day?" Right? And we were like, no, it was just a global April Fool's joke, and it's all just coincidence. But people have that natural suspicion. So how do you overcome that concept of, it's all online, who's collecting what, who knows what about me, how is this all happening, is this a coincidence, is this not? And from a design perspective, in that situation, you design for transparency and you design for control. How can you be very clear with users what exactly you have? So we have web history, right? So if I'm logged in and I'm using personalized search, and we're for the purposes of improving your quality, keeping track of the searches you do and what you click on, so we can enhance it. You can actually click on web history, and you can see exactly what searches you did, what you clicked on, and what information we have, and are personalizing that search based on. Your search gets a lot better, so that's the trade-off. You're giving up a little bit of your privacy, but your search gets a lot better, and it's still just between you and Google. Similarly, when you're using our toolbar, right, there are different features that come into play, and you can decide whether or not you want Google toolbar to communicate back to Google the different sites that you're visiting. But again, that shows up on that same web history record, so you can see this is what Google knows about me. This is the information that they have associated with me. And then also controls. Can I sign out and say I don't want Google tracking me anymore? Absolutely. You can still have the anonymous experience on Google, and we aren't keeping track of what you as a person are doing on the site, so you can sign out. Could I pause it? Could I just tell Google, I really just don't want this feature for the next hour. I really want to turn it off and not have it come back on until I decide. So you really need to put the user in charge. So one, let them know what you have, and two, put the user in charge. And I think that's really how you design an experience virtually that makes people feel more comfortable. Obviously, we don't have the ability to have the in-person interaction, but we do feel that it's important that people can use Google whether or not they've identified themselves as themselves.
And the controls mostly through the toolbar? This is kind of like news.
So we have on our search result page in the upper right-hand corner, you'll see web history.
Yeah.
And so when you're logged in and you're using personalized search, you can click on that and you can see it. And the toolbar dovetails right in. We didn't want you to have to say, well, what does the toolbar know? What does the toolbar know versus what does Google search know? What does this know, right? Like, we just merged it all together into one transparent view. This is what we know about your web history today. We know it because you've made choices about your settings that caused us to collect it. You can remove items. So if you say, gosh, I wish Google didn't know that, you can delete it from our memory. And you can also sign yourself in and out as you please in terms of what information you want collected in the future.
Wow. Cool. That's good. More questions? Wow, a lot of questions. Let's see. In the back. We'll do all the questions.
Hi, I was interested in what you had to say about the gap between policy and possibility. And I wanted to get back to Bruce's question about whether there should be a national innovation advisor, and to see if you would have any recommendations for the new president about who that should be, discounting all of you, of course.
Well, I'll start off. I think one of the more interesting products we have that I think builds implicitly community is something called Google Trends, where you can actually search people's searches in aggregate, so you can't see what specific users done, but you can see things in aggregate. And one of my favorite sort of parlor games is, does Google Trends predict elections correctly? And I've actually looked at like 5 or 6 elections, and right now we're at like 4 out of 5, 4 out of 6, and right now Obama's ahead. So Google Trends, and it makes sense, right? Who are people thinking about more? Because whoever they're thinking about more, they search for more. They search, and so it's not a surprise that it does. There's a correlation. It's not an absolute prediction, but there is a correlation. And right now Obama's ahead. So Google Trends says Obama's going to win by a reasonable margin, like something like 5 to 10%. His little blue line has been ahead of McCain's red line for a while. I think on innovation, I actually think that maybe we would benefit from a national innovation policy, but I actually think that innovation is something that in many ways is done better from the ground up or in a grassroots way, and it's very hard to dictate innovation down. I actually think that one thing that Google has done really well is not segmenting innovation. We don't have an R&D arm. We don't say, you're responsible for innovation, you're responsible for maintenance. It's everyone's job to innovate. The designers need to innovate, the engineers need to innovate, the product managers need to innovate, and you can tell that our HR team likes to innovate. Our office looks like no other on the planet. Our finance team likes to innovate. Like our IPO was completely like nothing else that had ever been done before. So I really think that the real way you get innovation sparked and fueling is to, one, make it everyone's responsibility, and then really fuel innovation envy. Right? What I think is sort of interesting, when I look at HR and finance and some of the departments I wouldn't have expected at Google to innovate, you can kind of tell like there's jealousy. They're like, we're not going to leave all this innovation stuff to the engineers and the designers. Like, this is part of our job too. We want part of the cool fun. Like, we want a good story as to what we've designed and we've done differently. And I think that's really how innovation really takes flight. And I think it does come from the ground up, and it is grassroots. Maybe a national policy would help, but I think it's a very small part of the equation of what makes innovation actually work.
We're organized as a meritocracy, so we have situations where people join us, and one of the measures is innovation. We have 700 people in New York at our agency, and we've had a couple of my students make it to VP level pretty quickly. And I think one of the things we really look at is innovation. And we don't have a chief innovation officer or anything like that. I think that it would be good if the next administration would just not hire cronies and instead hire people who are really talented in their area that they're operating in, and that they collaborate better. I think that's a really important part, because innovation comes out of collaboration.
Yeah, I agree, and I think, to the point about who owns innovation, I think innovation is part of the entire, it's everybody's responsibility, and certainly the innovation role at Citi is one that's primarily focused on how do we create the success conditions so that everybody feels that innovation is a valued use of my time, that it will be rewarded, that it is something that is honored, that it really ties to the overall mission of the organization. And so it's hard for me to think, when I think about the role of government, it's an interesting question because I've not thought about it. I think it comes down to, it starts with the education system, because the success conditions for innovation, to me the primary success condition is the right culture and environment. And you can't sort of legislate a culture or create a culture out of policy. It starts with kids and what's going on in the education system that starts to signal that this is something that is worth spending time on, that it has value, that there's a pursuit of knowledge that really is important in the field of design and innovation. I think it's very, very important. So when I relate that back to a large company like Citi, creating the right cultural conditions, because we are not a Google, right? We're very, very, this is a very established 115-year-old company with some very deep roots and a very embedded culture. It starts with, is the CEO sponsorship there? Are the right signals in place that this is a good use of time? Are the rewards there, both emotional and tangible? Am I getting paid for it? And it also comes back to the issue, I think, also talent and diversity. So in my mind, I totally agree. Innovation comes from collaboration, and it comes from collaboration among diverse teams. So it would be great if cronyism went away, because I think without diversity on every dimension, diversity of thought, diversity of background and perspective, et cetera, it's very, very hard to get innovation. So talent becomes, getting the right people on the case and putting them in the right culture with the sponsorship from the top and the right motivations becomes very important. But I think there's something about the education system here that could potentially be reoriented to really motivate teachers and school systems to sort of honor innovation and value it in the curriculum.
So what are we talking about? In terms of introducing or reintroducing creativity in K through 12, are we talking about bringing back art? Are we talking about that has been denuded out of so much? What are we? Is that it, or what else?
I don't know. It's funny. I've never thought about this question, but
music, or
design.
I mean, when schools cut budgets, when we live in a top school, we live in one of the top school systems in New Jersey, and there was a huge issue because it's a top school system. Guess what? The school became really overcrowded. Everybody started moving out of New York into our school system, and the first thing that cut was the art program. They eliminated the art room and put art on a cart because they needed the classroom space. So that may, on one level, look like an incredibly rational decision, but why was that the first thing to be taken out of a dedicated classroom space in a top school system, right? And until they do the expansion of the building. So I think just to think differently about those trade-offs and maybe weight the value of those kinds of activities a little differently.
Well, I also think that, I think it would be great to actually have more creativity and innovation design taught in school. But I actually think that the way that we teach and the way that we adapt to new technologies can in itself be a lot more innovative. And I think if the students start seeing more innovation and change there, that would be a huge help. Do we teach math exactly the same way as we did 20 years ago? In most cases, yes. Do we teach English and writing the exact way we used to 20 years ago? Yes. I mean, and I spent some time with some interesting elementary school teachers last year thinking about, what if you made it fun? Like, what if you made it more adaptable and personalized? Like, what if you made it like a video game? Right? I mean, like things like Oregon Trail was a really interesting first step because it actually made it fun to learn and solve puzzles and do interesting things. But what if, there was a little bit, I think it's too radical to say everything should be taught that way, but what if, classrooms had in it this element of there's the generalized learning for everyone, and then there is a little part of each day that's personalized per student and starts to incorporate some of these new technologies that make learning exciting and fun and more personal to you. And I think that, you know, as I said, I do think innovation envy is a real thing that occurs, right? Where, you know, if you, or it's innovation inspiration, either one. But for kids to see, wow, my teacher tried something new and it really worked and it was fun, like, you know, and like I think that actually would do a lot towards them thinking, well, I should value doing something new. I should value doing something hard. And I think role models are a big thing. I mean, I grew up, and one of my favorite role models was my ballet teacher growing up. I grew up in Wausau, Wisconsin, and you know, no challenge was too big for her, right? If she's like, we need good music, and she would convince the symphony orchestra from Milwaukee to drive up and play the Nutcracker for this tiny little, right? For what was a reasonably tiny, small dance academy in Wausau, in a 75,000 person town. But you know what I mean? And like, and I have to say, like, that was a huge inspiration to me. Watching Mrs. Carcar just every week being like, you know what? I want new costumes here. I want a better symphony there. Like, she was just unstoppable, and I think that's a huge inspiration. If you could imagine some of that happening in a classroom in a more rote environment, I think it would be something that really inspires people to innovate.
Yeah, totally. That's wonderful.
And try and do hard things.
Good. Over here?
I'm forming this question as I talk. Not long ago, I saw a data visualization some guy did of his experience online. It was this massively complex mind map kind of thing, and it showed that our experience online and using these tool sets you're talking about are really bifurcated and crazy. And we just came through an experience where the open market, you know, creativity, innovation went berserk, and we're all paying the price for it. So when you're talking about healthcare, I'm curious about getting back to the government. I think some people have talked about the role of control and where government acts and where private market takes in. Because in a Citibank, you kind of opt into that relationship, and trust is the basis of it. But if I want to go to HSBC, I have a whole other experience to do that, and there's no integration. But with healthcare, it's a different story, and I think, you know, if you look at companies like Microsoft and Sun, there are alternate ways of trying to create online identities that were sort of Uber identities. And it gets into a really interesting area where, you know, you're a for-profit company, you're making a lot of money, but if you own that core kind of competency, capability, it really gets into this question of what should be regulated, what shouldn't, how do you innovate and yet protect people in a sort of holistic way. So I'm not sure if I formed the question right, but if we could talk about that.
I think that the bifurcation, especially in a lot of the technologies online, is real. How many times do you sign into different websites with different usernames and different passwords during the day? A ton of times. That said, I really do think, you know, you think, well, what's the opposite of innovation? You know, is it being stagnant? And I actually think that one of the counterbalances or forces of opposition to innovation is integration. Right? Where if you integrate too early, you can actually sort of overgeneralize to the point where you build something that's not good at any particular thing. It was interesting, when we were designing Gmail, we had the Gmail team, and the groups team, and the reader team. And we all got into a room, and we had a week's worth of meetings talking about, well, you know what, in all three of these interfaces, you read a lot of things. Occasionally you write some things, you know, you might want to share things. It feels like these three things should come together, right? Why would we have three technologies instead of just one? But then there was this sort of nagging feeling like, you know what, none of these products are launched. None of them are successful yet. We don't know how well they meet user needs. And maybe what we should do is try and build a really great mail system, or a really great mailing list system in the form of groups, or a really great way to read RSS feeds, and sort of let 1,000 flowers bloom. And then once we've got successful products, then look at how can you merge the two, right? Because I think if we had tried to merge them earlier, we would have ended up with a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit, and it wouldn't have done any of the three tasks particularly well. And so I think that now we're looking at Gmail and Reader. There's a lot of similarities. And, just structurally, there's a left nav. There's like a different way of, there's sort of this idea of concatenated messages for fast reading in threads in Gmail and also in the RSS feeds in Reader. And so we're starting to see some of the similarities, and I think we could merge this in together. So your RSS feeds and your email could be merged together, or they could be under 2 separate tabs, and we could unify them. But you really need the innovation to get us there before we integrate. And in healthcare, it's really hard because the innovation itself has to come through a heavily integrated system, right? So how do the charts move from here to there? How do you integrate into a doctor's daily life, right? Because that's how we're really going to actually help get the records, and that's how we're actually going to help improve healthcare. And so when you have doctors who are incented on seeing the most possible patients. So I mean, I had an interesting conversation with a doctor where he said the internet is the worst thing that ever happened to medicine. And I thought, wow, like that's a really strong statement. Like, what do you mean? And he said, look, the way that I make more money is I shave it down from seeing a patient in 10 minutes to seeing a patient in 7. And he said the worst thing that ever happens is somebody comes into my office and they say, I've been doing some research on the internet. Funk. And they pull out this huge folder of all the things they've read on the internet and all the things they might have that they need to now be talked out of having. Because he's like, the moment that happens, I just sit to myself and think like, this is going to be 25 minutes, and like, how am I going to get to those people later today? And like, how am I ever going to actually get my throughput up? And I think that it's really interesting to think about in a system that's really heavily entrenched, is really heavily integrated already. How can you change those patterns and pathways such that the information flow from the doctor online is easy, so a patient can do that research at home and not really violate some of the principles? It means changing incentives and rewards and interesting systems like that. And I've obviously evoked a lot of comment.
I just want to point out one thing that happened to me recently. I go to a very busy doctor who has a lot of people in the waiting room, and I was there and I was standing there. I was trying to pay my bill, and I was standing next to this guy who happened to be a Hasidic Jewish guy, and we're standing there and we're talking, and he said to me, "Boy, Dr. I'll leave his name out for a moment." He said, "He's beginning to look more and more like a FedEx guy, because the doctor carries a tablet now, and all of his schedules, the prescriptions, they all go into a database, which is the input side of this that needs to happen in order to really share records and stuff. They have to work differently." And I just thought I'd bring that up. And he does look like a FedEx guy.
Yeah, I want to bring up just a little bit of a counter view. I'm not sure that everybody wants full integration of their data. So I think it's easy to fall into the trap of believing that the right thing to do is to bring everything together. And just as a specific example of that, we did, I was involved in some ethnographic research that we did in Japan a couple of years ago. And in Japan, which is, in contrast to the United States, a great saving society, the woman tends to act sort of as the CEO of the household. And so we did work with women who were CEOs of the household to understand financial management. And there's a whole dynamic there of women deliberately opening up bank accounts in multiple institutions as a means, because they deliberately want to segregate, segment, and in some cases even, hide some of the spend and some of the accumulation that's going on. And so in that type of situation, it would be unbelievably destructive to the experience the customer is trying to create for themselves to actually force things to come together. So I think it's really gets back to, I think a great innovation and successful innovation comes from starting with people and understanding what people's needs really are and understanding what tasks they're trying to accomplish, and then helping them get those tasks done in ways that are not only acceptable but sort of magical, delightful, wonderful, easy, intuitive, and really understanding the different kinds of people, the different personas that exist, and really developing against that is very key. So integration is, and in financial services generally, even in this country, I've seen over the too many years that I've been involved in this industry, a real desire among people to want to segment. Segment relationships, and I think we have to understand how do you support that need and that very, very embedded behavior. without over-integrating in a way that becomes troublesome to consumers.
Financial supermarket model.
And I think in some ways open architecture, we call open architecture, has been very successful, certainly in the brokerage industry. You could go to any brokerage firm and have access to any fund.
Yeah.
So that open architecture model where you can really look across what different institutions have to offer is very instantiated and very successful in certain parts of the industry. But I think in other parts, there's room to grow, and in other parts, it's not what people are looking for.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Another question. Yes.
Oh, actually.
Right behind you, and then you, and then we'll move it along.
Okay. Yeah. You just want to go ahead and speak right here?
Okay, then. Thank you.
Oh.
That's okay. So my question really is around innovation policy. In Australia, for the last 10 years, we have had an innovation policy, and that very much has come from the top down. And you're quite right, it hasn't really worked in the sense that it hasn't, while it's identified those creative activities that could actually, that do contribute to the innovation system, it hasn't actually generated new practices. In the last little while, the manifesto for the creative industries in Australia and for the innovation debate have actually turned to work towards social networks and the importance of those social networks in innovation. And in doing so, it has brought both design and cultural organisations like museums and libraries into the debate for the first time. And I'm interested to see whether in the States you've actually worked through two of the key concepts that are coming out of that, which have to do with the development of value networks and the relationships then that both design and cultural organisations can create with broader community and broader industry partners, and then the development of new models for design, and particularly in relationship with cultural organisations, around distributed co-creation.
Wow.
Don't know. We're all looking at you because you're in the middle.
One example I've seen, I think that's an untapped opportunity in financial services, where I'll just to name a company in the United States that I think has done this. Procter & Gamble has a widely recognized Connect and Develop network where they clearly are doing what you are talking about in the context of innovating around consumer products. I think there are other companies that are doing that as well, but I think in financial services, upside opportunity to really think through.
Well, I would make the observation, I think the Connect and Develop is about assembling small teams of people that are really interested in something. And I think if a co-creation policy can really create that, then it may work. But I really think, our CEO, Eric, made this observation a while ago. He's like, everything in technology that has been really innovative and gotten big and successful has started with 2 or 3 people. It's like, name one successful technology that started with a team of 50. He's like, it just doesn't happen. He was like, give me one counterexample, and we've been trying for months. We can't. It all starts with 2 or 3 people. In small product lines inside a company, that's true. In terms of startups that then get bigger and successful later, it's true. It all starts with really small teams. Sometimes it's an individual. Actually, interestingly, usually it's not an individual. Usually it's 2 or 3 people coming together, and but that's the right critical mass to really get a great idea going. And when you start getting a team that's too big, designed by committee, is really a real issue, right? And you look at some of the technologies that have been produced by a team that started at 50 people, and they're real hairballs, right? They just really don't do what you want them to do, and there's just no clear vision there. And so I think that to the extent that a co-creation policy can help us form those little seeds of 2 or 3 people and get those ideas going, and then you take those ideas and fuel them up, maybe it has a chance of working. But if it's really about sort of bringing people together in mass to innovate, I just don't think that works. That's not how real innovation gets built.
I think the small team is the right way to do it. Ours are a little bigger than 3 people. But we put together a team of people, and if we had the perfect situation, it would be around a round table, which is what I'd like to do in the future. I've always found it curious when you go out to eat, and it's a horizontal table, you can only talk to 2 people or 3. When you're at a round table, you could talk to 8. And so we have about 8 people in our team structure. And you do want a person from information design, user experience. You do want a technologist there. It's becoming more important to have a media person sitting there that knows all the possibilities in that regard. A retail person that understands the integration with physical space, and then somebody who is a producer who understands how to deliver software. And anyway, they start a dialogue, and it may wind up that it does wind up where the best ideas come from 2 or 3 of the people there. But we never know which 2 or 3 it's going to be. And there's a real democracy to the group, and a good idea could come from anywhere. And I actually think in our business, which may be true of most businesses, that the DNA that is part of the culture of an advertising agency for all the years going back to Mad Men has been fiercely competitive and not collaborative. And I sort of point to 2 things I've been heavily involved with in the past that are the best examples that I've seen of collaboration in a creative enterprise, and that's TV commercial production and feature film production. So when you look at a feature film, you might see at the end of the feature 1,400 names, which could be hundreds of companies, all working together on that one project. And that's where I spent quite a lot of my time in the past. And I still think it's the best example of a creatively driven collaborative structure. And advertising agencies are possibly the worst that I've run across. It may also happen at corporate that there's this instilled competitive situation. But.
Yeah. I think it's fascinating to bring that up because collaborative innovation is very hot in the U.S. these days, distributed innovation. There's just a lot of buzz about it. IBM has had innovation jams, and the last one, whatever, they had 46,000 new ideas, and they've culled that down to a dozen. And they say that they've generated $300 million in revenues and all the rest of it, which, but the culture of that and what you get out of it, there are companies, Innocentive and others that are making a big business out of it. It's problematic. It depends on the culture, I guess, is what you're talking about, and on maybe the size of the innovation, or whether it's a game-changing innovation that comes out of it, or whether that stuff produces more incremental innovation and you add on to it. I don't know, but it's interesting that you bring it up because at the moment it's very au courant here. So I don't know. Maybe one more question or 2. Yeah.
I was just wondering, I know all of you are very well known for your thoughts on innovation. I was wondering if there's things when people present ideas to you that different frameworks or books you've read that influence how you approach furthering the innovation of a project, or leading an innovative effort within your firm.
You're asking
if there's books or frameworks or advice you've gotten that you think about when you're trying to push innovation in some way, whether it's on a project or in your personal life or whatever it may be.
What are your personal life?
I'll start. And I think the two books I recommend to new product managers at Google are The Art of Innovation by David Kelly, because I think there's a lot of it's a good nuts and bolts for how do you try and build a culture that works that way, and then also The Design of Everyday Things by Don Norman, because it's just, that's sort of the red pill, blue pill for design, I call it. Once you read that book, the whole world becomes completely infuriating at how badly designed it is. So you have to decide if you're ready for that or not. But I think those 2 books are important. I think when I see teams come in and give demos to me and say, hey, here's a new project or here's a new idea, I think there's a couple of things that I'm looking for. One, I'm looking, is it an easy to understand and an easy to express technology? And I actually use my mom as an example a lot. She's actually in the back today, and she probably hates being pointed out. But I'll say, like, people will say something, and they'll come in and they'll show me a project, and I'll be like, my mom just wouldn't get this. Like, how am I ever going to explain that, the way this, it's like it's sort of this, it's hard to describe, but you really want to, again, being Midwestern, like, I think to myself, like, if I had to go back and explain that this is what I was working on, would it take me 5 hours or, 5 seconds? And I do think at the heart of that, my mom is a good litmus test there, but I think another litmus test, which I've started to look at now for innovation, is in our core innovation, there's sort of almost a Mad Libian sentence you can fill in. Google X focused on Y, and no one else was doing that. Google Search focused on getting the right results first when no one else was prioritizing that. Gmail focused on giving users huge amounts of storage, 250 times more than anyone else was, and no one else was doing that. Google Chrome is looking at new types of web pages and actually optimizing those, not HTML pages, looking at JavaScript and other things, and no one else was doing that. Browsers have gotten stagnant. And so usually when you can sort of fill that in, like Google AdSense made it easy to monetize content using relevant text ads when no one else was doing that. And usually even for good products there'll be 2 or 3 sentences like that, but you can sort of almost find that type of structure. So when I'm assessing the idea, it's really about, will my mom get it, and is there that core of innovation that can really easily be expressed in that Mad Libian sentence.
Simplicity, uniqueness.
Yeah, and I think that the other thing that is really true is, innovation, especially in technology, is all about people. And so I asked Eric at one point, I said, Eric, gosh, I see so many different things show up on my desk in terms of different ideas, different teams, different projects. Like, I can barely keep it all straight. How do you keep it all straight? Because he's got to hear from finance, HR, and all these other people. And he said, he's like, I'll be honest, a lot of times I don't know all the details and I don't know all the answers. He's like, but what I do, he's like, then I sit back and I listen to the team. And he's like, and when the team is really good and I think that we're really going to accomplish something, he's like, it's almost like I get a vision. I get a vision of that team trying to take the mountain. He's like, in my mind, he's like, I envision them charging up the mountain with a flag. And because he's like, he's like, there's a sense, there's an energy about them. There's a, I'm not going to take no for an answer. There's a, I'm not going to fail anyhow. And anyway, I'm just not going to let that happen in this state. And so I think you assess the idea, and then you also assess the team strength, and you want that sense of like, these people are not going to take no for an answer, and they're not going to fail. They're just not going to let that happen.
Well, I'm famous for buying books, reading the first chapter, and then not finishing them. So I'm not going to be very good at recommending books. And I found, for my own exposure to innovation, I'm sort of a marketing person by training, and the way I got involved more directly in innovation was a few years ago. My boss, who's the CEO of our business, came to me and said, I need you to focus on innovation because we need to be more innovative. And I had like no idea what he was talking about. And the way I learned was really by looking at other companies that were doing innovation. Well, I find it such a fast-paced field, and because I'm less of a theorist, more pragmatist, I have to apply innovation to get business results. Right? That learning on the fly by visiting with other companies and learning from their successes and understanding how do I bring those success factors back to Citi to create the right success conditions really has been the way that I've learned versus through books. In terms of when I assess an idea, what I look at is first, like, what's the customer need? So show me that people have this need, and show me that there's a universe of these people that's large enough that there's, that this actually could be a business opportunity. So I think one of the things that kills innovation in big companies too early is people expect kind of a pro forma P&L of how this thing is going to make money. And I think that you have to kind of hold back on that. And with a very new idea, particularly the more disruptive it is, the more you have to understand: is there really an unmet need? Am I hitting some emotional chord with people where I can help them solve a really important problem, and can I do it in a way that's simple and elegant, and are there enough of those people out there that, assuming I'm successful, it actually can create not only value for individuals but value for the business, because we are, a profit-making company. And I think simplicity becomes really important. It's funny, last night on the train going home, I was reading a business plan. A friend of mine is trying to start a direct bank She said, would you just, kind of off the record, read my business plan? And it's a very interesting idea, but it is so complex. And I think complexity can just make things implode. And I'm much more a fan of, focus on stage one. Get the initial sort of seed of the idea planted and get something going, and then learn your way through in an iterative way how to build out a more robust idea over time. And I think that's very, very important to success. A complexity can cause even something that looks great on paper to implode. And then lastly, the thing that I really look for is prototyping. So have you prototyped the idea and brought it to life in some real way? And in the service industry, obviously, that, like banking, that wouldn't be, there's not a physical thing, but have you prototyped the experience? Yeah. And do you have a way to kind of dry run that experience on even a small sample of people to see, again, if you're invoking, are you hitting an emotional chord that's going to attract people to the idea?
Yeah. John Mayer has a nice book out on simplicity. It's a simple little book. So, maybe one more question. Yes?
I'm curious about just educating people and users with the different websites, because you were naming a lot of Google things that I haven't even heard of. But I'm a Google user, I'm a Gmail user, and I'm curious about how do you get people to know which tools are right for them. I tend to sort of wait for something to stick with some friends, and then maybe I'll use it and try it out, see if I can get to know it. But a lot of things, we were talking about innovation, and as a counterpoint, thinking about integration, but I'm also wondering about standardization. Like, what kinds of things are common among websites or common among systems to help people navigate from, if they switch banks, whether is this going to be the same kind of interface, are they going to have the same sense and still have a sense of the different identity of the company? And like in my mind, that seems to sort of contradict one another. So I'm wondering how you guys sort of look at that as a way to, I don't know, what are your thoughts?
I could just take one crack at it. When we do website design, we try to standardize as much as we can. And then we design into the architecture an upgrade path. Going back to a mention of John Mayer, who's taken over as the president of RISD, I think that it's critical to simplify what you're doing without oversimplifying it. And I think that I've spent a lot of time just recently on your site. On the search engine, there's a button for more. And as you click on that, you get all these applications. And I think that, the amount of things that are out there today are just daunting. I find that students just have, that are growing up as millennials, are able to go from one interface to another. Like if they switched a banking program and went to another one, I don't think they would have the kind of trouble that others might trying to figure out how to get back to where they were. Because the interfaces would be very different from bank to bank. There's no sort of uniform structure to it.
Well, educate, we have a lot of products. We have a ton of products. In fact, I just made a list of all of our products the other day, and I think there's more than 100. But I've been responsible for the homepage and the main search engine design now for a little over 9 years. And a bunch of years ago, I looked at Yahoo. And over the course of a fall, I polled about 200 people. And I said, write down the properties that the products and properties that you know are on the Yahoo homepage. What are the links? And I actually had my answer key. There were 38 things on their homepage. And out of the 200 people that I asked, the average was 7 to 12 things. It's almost like short-term memory. That's what people could remember. They could remember 7 to 12 things that are there and not many more. The best answer ever, so remember there's 38 total, was 22. And that was from someone who had left Yahoo less than a month earlier. Right? So I mean, people who work at the company don't even know all the things that are on their homepage, and it's on their homepage, let alone buried deep in the set. So at that point, I sort of said, you know what? It's not about making sure that all users know about all products. Don't do that, because one, it's not meaningful to them, and it's not even meaningful to us. But do focus on what are the 7 to 12 things that really matter, and how do you get those put in front of people in a way that's powerful, that's compelling, and then how do you take all the new ideas and sort of swirl them into those nuclei? If you think of those big products as sort of the nucleus, right? How do you actually have those other ideas be electrons? It's interesting, Google Calendar is getting a lot of buzz, but I really think of Calendar as a feature of mail. Right? It's there when you want it. And so we're being really smart now. When you get an email that mentions like, hey, do you want to have dinner at such and such at 7 p.m. on Thursday? If you notice in the right-hand bar, it actually says, do you want to put this on your calendar, 7 p.m. Thursday? And it just extracts the information. Because we really view that people are used to mail and calendar working together, and to get people to switch over to Gmail, a lot of people are saying, look, I need to have a really good calendar that works in parallel with it. And they're features, and you know, they're, when you look at, say, like the social network on Orkut, message boards, something like groups, really is just a feature of how do people trade messages in products like this. And I think, and when you get back to search, my analogy has always been that of a Swiss Army knife, right? Where there's a lot of little functions in there. But if you've ever gone to Switzerland, you see how they splay all the knives open and they put everything out there. And if you actually stick your hand in the case, which I was actually with someone who did once, you know, you spend about 5 hours in the hospital sewing up, like whatever, you know, because you can actually hurt yourself. There's just so much exposed. And you know, that's the portal approach, right? The portal approach is tell the users everything you can do all the time. Just put it all out there, throw it all in front of them. Don't try and make coherent little sets of information. And you know, Google is that Swiss Army knife closed. You come, it's simple, put the words you want in the box, and then we try and pull out the lovely doodad, the screwdriver, the hook, when you need it. So when you find a web page that seems relevant to your answer, but it's in the wrong language, there's a translate this page link right there. You don't need to go to you don't need to think, Google does translation. I can go to the home page, click in there, paste it in, right? Like it just translates right in place. And so again, like we try and have calendar present itself right when it's useful in mail. We try and have translate present itself right when it's useful in search. We try and have different restricts, right? So like drilling down, if you say, gosh, I really want more from this website, there's more, you know, more results from the site, generally right under a site that has a lot of relevant results. So we try and take all those lovely features and build them in, because we don't think you're going to have rote memorization of our entire product line up front. So figure out what the big nuclei are, swirl these as features into them, and then also make sure you've got great in-context placement of features.
Yeah, I think the best experiences on the web are ones that don't require education, training, help, but they're so intuitive, so customized, and so automatic that they're there for people. And I think the challenge for businesses are going to be, you know, in the old days, you sort of, you know, you would develop a new product or feature and market, you know, to try to build awareness. It's becoming so expensive, and the whole model for marketing to people just has to be rebuilt, that it's almost becoming imperative, if you want people to take advantage of your products and services, to just be built into their lives. And again, intuitive, customized there when people need them. And I think it's a huge paradigm shift that Marissa's speaking to that I think is happening. And people who are successful at that are going to have, you know, more utilization of their products and services.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Bob. Thank you very much.